Welcome to Oakland Is. This show features movers, shakers, and image makers. We are most privileged today to have back, returning to us here in America. His name is Lama Choyin Rangdrol, Lama. I understand when I last spoke with you, you were a yogi, and now you are a Lama, or am I incorrect?
You are correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's slightly a difference. A yogi is one who's on the path.
A yogi can be a person who is new, and one can stay a yogi their entire Buddhist life. I think that if you acquire enough meditative experience and enough training, and you have the good graces of your teachers, they can determine as a result of their work with you that you're ready to teach other human beings. And so for me, in different Buddhist traditions it's done differently, but for me, my teacher simply identified me as Lama in front of some other abbots of monasteries, and there was no pomp or circumstance or anything of that nature. It was just a simple comment. In our tradition, the idea of Lama is held as sacred, and there is a process by which in Tibet, your teacher would take a gold pipe, a tube, maybe about 3 or 4 inches long, and whisper it into your ear, Lama. So it's for that reason this tradition is sometimes called the whispered lineage, and a lot of the information that comes to you from your teacher to become a Lama is actually whispered in your ear and shown to you secretly. So there is a process, and it's different for different traditions, but just having acquired the meditative time and the skills to be able to communicate the essence of Buddhism to different human beings has brought me to the status of Lama.
Oh, that is so precious. Just to hear that explanation, I wish to thank you so much, because it makes me think of a very famous bishop who, in the United Methodist Church, when we were doing a memorial service for one of our teachers. She was actually the first African-American teacher in the city of Berkeley who was made that in 1943. But she passed away in the late 90s, or late 80s actually. And he said, the spirit of the teacher. The spirit of the teacher, and he talked about Jesus in the Bible and the spirit of the teacher. That the teacher says that to the student, you will be greater than I am. And it's about a reciprocity kind of thing that goes on, that says that the teacher learns from the student also.
Right.
But the whispering part, I was so happy to hear you say that.
Right.
That good teachers have a spirit about them, that the full essence of them isn't always the concrete things about, oh, you're teaching me a variety of different things.
Right.
But it's a spirit.
And it's very different from the Western idea of accumulating information to become a teacher, certification, things of that nature. You know, it's a very intimate student-teacher relationship that has deep mutual affection for one another.
Right.
And that sense of affection is the portal through which a lot of the esotericism, the things that cannot be explained easily in words, are communicated. So I spent 10 years with my teacher, watching him meet and do really unbelievable things with human beings, and to be challenged greatly too. And so he imparted a lot of the understanding that I have, not through words, not through books, but through living example.
Yes.
And then, you know, it was my job to try to figure out what it meant to emulate him.
Yes.
And he died a couple of years ago, but I really felt that I had received a quality experience, and was happy to know that before he died, he whispered this word in my ear.
Yes. I was thinking about Tuesdays with Maury. I don't know if you heard about that story. This was a professor who was dying slowly, and his student came to be with him on Tuesdays, I think it's every week during that period. But he was just, it's a beautiful story about the value of that teacher to the student. So I really appreciate your sharing that about Lama, what that actually means. And then to know that the Dalai Lama is the highest, or something about his eminence and his holiness. That's because I've heard about him a great deal all over traveling around the world.
Well, we were talking about titles.
Yes.
And there are titles such as His Eminence and His Holiness, and there are lamas, very fine lamas, who, as a result of their organization sometimes and their particular traditions, they are referred to as His Eminence Lama so-and-so, His Holiness Lama so-and-so, and also there's another word, Rinpoche. But my teacher was very clear. He said there's only one His Eminence and one only His Holiness. And that's His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That's it.
Okay.
And so he made it really clear for me. And but I do, when I come across a teacher that is referred to by any of these titles, I try to honor the fact that their tradition or their students or their organization calls them by that name.
I understand that there's something called the Afro-Asia, or African presence in Asia. And could you share with us about your work in this area?
Well, yes. When I first started in Buddhism, I was confronted with the fact that there were not many African American Buddhists. And so I had to find a motivating factor that could hold me, that didn't cause me to diminish in any way my African American cultural background. So I went on a journey in my own mind and researching, and I found that there was evidence of Africans in Asia, and I saw pictures of Buddha statues that had very African features, as though they were carved in Africa. And so as a result of that, once I was able to travel, I went to Asia, and I went to visit these statues and to have a first-hand experience of leaning my head against the statues as an acknowledgement that I have come from America to see you, and I hear you. And these statues are, some of them, 900 to 1,000 years old. And so for me it was very confirming, and it's kind of my message that I've been sending out to various communities, African American and other, that the African American experience, the global African experience, is not outside of Buddhism. It's just that we don't know. If we grew up in a society that never talked about Christianity, we would not know about it, but that would not mean that it's not there. It just would simply mean that we don't know about it. And there is a tremendous history in Africa, and if I could, there is a tribe, the Ndebele tribe, in South Africa, that wears the brass rings around their neck. Are you familiar with them?
I've seen that.
Yes, and then there are some, there's a tribal people in Burma who wear the same design brass rings around their neck. And a lot of people don't know that the country of Burma was once Tibet. And so there are these people in Burma who have the same brass rings around their neck as South African tribals, and they are Buddhist. I've been kind of researching, how that came to be, and I have thus far come to a kind of preliminary notion that there were traders who traded slaves in India and in China, and that these tribals may have been traded sometime in ancient past and brought the tradition of wearing brass rings around their neck. Yes. And so when I was in Thailand, I had an opportunity to meet the tribe and to spend time with them, and really, not only do they practice Buddhism, but they practice the same exact tradition I do.
Oh, man.
So, this idea of the African continuum and our culture as global citizens and human beings who have a deep history in this world is yet to be excavated with regards to the presence in Asia, and that's kind of what I've been doing with that kind of work.
Now, in your excavation work, I understand you're planning to do something with the historically black colleges, and that you recently did something at Tennessee State,
right? Well,
which is where Oprah went to school.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Tell us about that.
Well, when I went to Cambodia to visit these statues, I took a camera with me and I developed a documentary. And I was happy to be able to premiere that documentary at Tennessee State, which, by the way, is my mother's alma mater.
Oh, really?
And so it was really a historic moment for the first African-American black Buddhist teacher to premiere a documentary about Afro-Asia at a historically black college.
Your mother majored in what?
She was sociology.
Sociology.
Yes, she was a sociologist.
Yes. So tell us about the Tennessee State exposure.
Well, it was a film festival that was housed at Tennessee State and jointly coordinated by Tennessee State and Fisk.
Oh, and
so Fisk was there too.
Really?
And it was really a very interesting experience to introduce a film about Africans and Buddhism in the Bible Belt at a HBCU. And so we had some discussions after the film festival, and Fisk extended an invitation for me to come and do some talking about the movie and my experience and this history that's unknown. And so we discussed also the possibility of going on a tour of all of the HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities, discussing this matter.
Oh, that's great. And you are a musician also. So did you have music with the movie?
Yes, I was a musician. I do compose, and I wrote the score. I scored this, so all the music I wrote and laid it in on the tracks, in addition to shooting and editing. So it's kind of a one person show there, but and I would like to say that it was a creative force that inspired me, but really it was just budget concerns.
Yes.
And it's been successful. I've won an award in the Hawaiian Islands, believe it or not, the Accolade Award for Excellence in Filmmaking.
Really?
So, the Hawaiian culture today, I live in Hawaii, and they're always interested in stories about how people come to live in Hawaii. And mine is a long journey from Bellevue Hospital in New York City, through Tennessee, into Compton during the 60s, into LA County, going through all of that, then moving away to college and the Royal Academy and all these things, and then becoming a Buddhist and eventually moving to Hawaii. So it's just another story of how someone has come to Hawaii, but it's a unique story.
Did you become a Buddhist in England?
No. I went to Japan in 1971 with a youth group. That was my first exposure to Buddhism, although I didn't so-called convert to Buddhism at that time. I didn't really become serious about Buddhism for another 20 years. But I did meditate during that time period, and eventually I was actually in California when I made the decision to become a Buddhist.
And was it because of your being African American that you were motivated strongly?
No. I think that I saw in Buddhism what a lot of people see in their faith choice, an opportunity to become a better person, a more peaceful person, a more loving person, a more compassionate person. And so it spoke to me, and I followed the voice. That
is so interesting. I was thinking about President Obama being from Hawaii also, but also having made journeys to other places like, I'm trying to remember the place in Indonesia, I believe it was.
Correct, yes.
And then, I don't know about Kansas, I guess he went there to visit his grandparents' home, and then to go to Chicago to do grassroots community organizing.
Yes.
And then he went to New York for a while.
Yes.
I read his book, Dreams from My Father.
Yes.
And I was thinking about the journey that you have made. And then there was something we were talking about, saying that America is not the world.
America is not the world. We can be deeply rooted in our American experience without ever knowing that there are billions of people who do not believe what we believe. They do not see the world and their creation as we see our world and our creation. They do not see our materialism and our propensity to have wealth as something that is regarded highly from their point of view. And so it's a wonderful statement. I think it's a futuristic statement, because President Obama is a global human being, and one of the reasons that he is attractive to people is because of his global identity, not just in terms of our voting for him, but how he's perceived in the world as not being just, only thinking about America. And so I hope that in the future that we'll be able to produce more young people from all races and all ethnic groups here in this great country that are inspired to define themselves from a global point of view.
Yes. For so long, there has been a need to have a global perspective because of the fact that we are not the only place in the world.
Yes.
I discovered this when I spent a year in Paris, that during the 60s, when the Vietnam War was going on. And at that time, America had the view of being stereotyped, you might say, as the ugly American. And I found that there was a great empathy for me as a black American, because people were feeling that African Americans were suffering in America. And so they had a great deal of concern about our welfare. But I also felt that the need to keep the communication going was so evident. And I remember when Eleanor Roosevelt was brought to the United Nations as an ambassador, she was rejected because of the way she talked. Because they said she talked like a turkey. But after a while, they started listening to what she was saying. And she became most powerful, despite they were no longer detracted from her voice.
Yes.
They listened to what she had to say.
Yes, and there are a lot of obstructions between human beings in terms of how we perceive each other, just as a result of the way we look, the way we talk, the way we think, our philosophies. And we can talk about it simply here, but if you really look at that issue closely, you'll find that it's at the core of the destruction of human beings and the creation of human suffering throughout the world, this difference. So again, I think to be a global citizen is not just to define yourself as that, but to actually open your mind to people who do not look like, think like, act like, talk like you. And if we can do that as it's a small shift, but it can mean everything. I think that there is a potential to address the kinds of global concerns that we have at a whole other level. It
may sound like a small shift, but it creates a big shift when it happens. The small shift. Sometimes the little things that we think are little are actually very big in terms of their impact. And I think the shift in consciousness, that's a topic that has been going on quite for a while now.
In Buddhism, we have a different idea about that. There are many examples that individuals have been through where you start crying about something, and then you think about it and you start laughing about the very same thing. Or you start laughing about something and you think about it differently, and then it becomes tragic. And we have a phrase for it, I'm laughing to keep from crying. And so the mind can shift very dramatically while observing the very same thing. And so if we understand that the mind's capacity is that it can make that shift, then we, on the one hand, can say that it's not easy, but we cannot say that it's not possible.
That's right.
And then the rest is, what kind of work do we need to do as individuals and as a culture and a society to promote the making of those kinds of shifts that are possible, that people feel may be so difficult that they think it's improbable.
And that's why I was listening to the community organizing concept about how to create those shifts in consciousness such that people are empowered to be their own best advocates. Because sometimes you're waiting for someone to speak for you, and it doesn't happen. You're waiting for someone else to do it.
Right. And I think that the issue of self-inflicted wounds through disempowerment, your self-inflicted disempowerment, the ability for a human being to disempower themselves just by the nature of their own thinking. I mean, we've come a long way. We don't have to worry about being beaten for having a different opinion. We do live in a somewhat free society where we can not always have to be concerned about being incarcerated because we think differently. We've come a long way. But I do think that in the future we're going to have to go inside, and we're going to have to liberate ourselves from the kind of self-enslavement that comes from thinking about oneself in a way that disempowers Because the result of that, if we don't change, is that human beings will, instead of evolving and growing, they will continue to mature ideas of low self-esteem, low self-confidence, poor self-image. These things are not necessarily coming from outside, but sometimes if a person is not given positive opportunities and choices, then a person can actually be their own worst enemy just by thinking of themselves as being something that is less than what they truly are.
This is why I found it so valuable to reread President Obama's book called Dreams from My Father. I reread it with the idea of studying what was going on internally with him in terms of self-discovery. And I found that he spent sufficient time, or a great deal of time, when he went back to Kenya to go back to his roots,
Yes.
or to discover them, because he didn't have the first-hand information. But he was able to spend enough time there to get a sense of who he was and self-discovery.
Yes, I was poor once, you know, in my trajectory of getting to where I am today, and I had to go on the county welfare, and I had to go through welfare to work, and there I was, educated, but broke. And so my first day, that I remember, will never forget, the instructor said to me, she held up a small toy of a dinosaur, and she said, "You know why these are not here anymore?" And of course, nobody wanted to say anything, so we all waited. And she said, "These dinosaurs are not here anymore because they couldn't adapt to change." And so it's not necessarily something that we need to think as an option. The fact is the world is changing very quickly. The fact is that things that we've held for so long have now become obsolete, and there's a new beginning. There's a new kind of existence that we, at the common folk level, can hold. It's free, improved self-esteem, improved self-image, improved self-confidence. These things are free, and we know now that with that and a global concept of oneself, that it's possible to become the President of the United States. So I think that's we're at a precipice, a new transitional point in our awareness of who we can be, and I hope that, you know, in no short order, that these kinds of discussions will go on and places where they need to happen.
That is so profound, because I remember George Washington Carver, who was the great researcher who had discovered so many valuable things.
Yes.
He had an appointment to speak to Congress, and they had him on the agenda at a certain time, but they wound up letting someone else speak during that period, and he only had maybe 10 minutes at the very end when they were through with everything else, and they were prepared for him to only speak that short time. But he was so engaging, because they didn't realize that they were going to be interested in what he had to say at all. And he wound up talking for several hours. And it was at the end of the day, and they'd already been there a long time. So I thought that alone showed this whole thing about what you just said.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
His ability to bring forth a presence. Sojourner Truth did the same thing.
Yes.
When she would go into communities, that they were prepared to ignore her. So I think it is that the power of the spoken word is amazing. And that's why I liked President Reagan. He was a good communicator. I like that about President Obama. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a good communicator. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and about the fact that America is not the world. So would you recommend that African Americans travel more, or what are your recommendations?
I think that, you know, all human beings have to be more conscious about the ability and the mechanisms for reaching out into the world to get a better understanding of what's going on in the world. Not everybody's going to have the ability to travel, but most people have access to a computer. Go on it, not because you have to, but because you want to, and you want to learn about yourself, and you want to learn about the world, and you want to learn what other people are doing, and what it looks like for you to perceive yourself as being somebody other than who you are. That's a better person, a more compassionate person, a more loving person, and also a person who has a purpose transcendent of your neighborhood and of your so-called local community, because there are people who come from local communities that have made tremendous impacts worldwide. And there is no reason why that can't be you.
I remember my high school history teacher was talking about the fact that he never traveled anywhere. I don't know if he was even in the Army, but he had read so profoundly and so many things that it showed that he knew what was going on in the world. He was a worldwide person in terms of his whole being. And I think about libraries being like that. People who spend a lot of time in the library, some of them are very informed about the world, and they don't travel.
I think it's becoming a necessity, you know, just because of how quickly things are changing on so many different levels, that this is no longer an option for any person who wants to have a place in this world in the future.
I'm so happy you're going to go and talk to the historically black colleges, because to help that perspective come about, we had something similar at Merritt College with the Black Student Union.
Yes.
They wore T-shirts where they showed the African presence all over the world.
Right.
It isn't just in Africa.
Yes.
And Africa being like the point where civilization started, which would say that we are all over the world as people, and that we have roots, and our DNA would reveal that to us.
I really wish that there was an effort to educate me more when I was young. You know, I'm kind of late to the game here as an adult.
Well, I must congratulate you for being one of the most well-educated individuals I have ever met.
That's a big
and I
compliment.
believe we need more people like you as teachers and educators. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon.